Hello and welcome back to Pipi Chongloy Talk Show. Thank you so very much for tuning in. Please subscribe to my channel in case you haven't so that you won't miss out on the upcoming episodes. Well, today I have with me the beautiful Makepeace Sitlhou, the only Emmy Award winning journalist from our community as well as in the entire Northeast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very good. How about you?
I'm great, thank you. I heard your award. So was it a dream comes true moment, or have you been working hard for this your entire life? Please share me your experience.
I wouldn't say that I've been necessarily working up to winning an Emmy. It really was honestly such a wonderful surprise. It of course came with a lot of support and backing from the Walter Cronkite School that I was a part of for 2 semesters as a Fulbright Fellow. From 22 to 23. So, I think just the making of the documentary, the class that I was a part of, Peter Bick, my professor, was, again, such a hype person for me in a sense. It's always great to have a hype man, supporting your work and really believing in you. And then, of course, also again, that initiative also came from the school, from Arizona State University, to enter our work into the regional Emmys. I think winning it something was I wasn't really even expecting to be shortlisted or anything like that. I'm extremely critical of my work, so I thought there were a lot of flaws in the documentary in that sense. But it's really nice to be appreciated, and actually more than anything, the documentary, the story is so close to my heart and close to even it was part of like 3 of us who were like foreign exchange fellows who worked on this. And worked on something which is such a raging American issue. It's a major issue when you talk about borders and immigration. It's a major issue also in the upcoming US elections. So I think the experience of having 3 outsiders, 3 non-Americans work on a border issue in the States and for it to be acknowledged and recognized by the Emmys is, I think it's obviously one of the, best moments for sure in my life.
I'm so happy for you, and the entire community, particularly the Kuki-Zos, are so proud of you, and I hope you know that. It's rare to see a woman in our community going out there exploring and doing things that they love. You are 1 in a million, and I really look up to you, and please continue to do so. Being a woman, let's talk about women issues. As we all know about the ongoing conflicts, our 2 women were paraded naked, and we all were hurt, seeing them. So you were working on a project or a documentary on witch hunting in Assam, and because of that, you were able to create awareness, and people came to know about it, right? So keeping that in mind, let's I don't know whether this is really accurate or not. Are women being paraded naked? Prior to the video, somebody had written articles about it, but it was overlooked. And after 1 month, the video got viral, and then that hurts the sentiments of not just our community, but people all over the world, right? I must say. So is it necessary to make a video or a document to reach out to people, or what is that? You please tell me, since you're from, journalism. So yeah, you will explain better.
I think there have been a few short, I would not call them documentaries, but then just news video reports that have been done by BBC, The Quint, and a bunch of publications, a bunch of media houses that essentially woke up to the conflict and the gravity of the conflict once the viral video came out, or basically the video went viral. But I do think there is an opportunity here to not just look at the outrage value of the video, which I think I think the video, I remember seeing the response of an actor like Kiara Advani, and she's not necessarily an actress I follow or anything like that, but I thought it was quite interesting, that sense that someone like Kiara, who is not even for that matter very political as an actress, or she probably would know very little about the Northeast herself, had found it so repulsive, and it just to me showed that the degree of I mean, of all kinds of like despicable behavior that was happening, that has been happening in this conflict, really kind of, I think, really resonated and finally reached home when this video came out. But to sort of simplify it, to say that this is one incident, I think, which has also been happening a lot, that people are like, this is the only incident and this is the one that really blew up, and that the entire conflict is only about this incident or this particular video would be pretty inaccurate, and I say this why, because the one aspect of the video is to really, like, of course, talk about how fake news played a huge role in a lot of the summary assaults that happen on women, right? I think it's also important because I have done a lot of reporting around the the internet shutdown and the spread of misinformation, disinformation in general before even this conflict. And yes, I think what everyone knows and has been established that there were, like, certain fake videos or videos from a different context that were going around WhatsApp groups, and in a lot of these statements also that have come out from the women victims, they heard their perpetrators saying that this is what you did to our women, so we're going to do the same to you. So that was like some sort of like a summary kind of a punishment or something on all Kuki-Zo women. But at the same time, I think the fake news that basically essentially kind of started it all, or really like spread like wildfire, and was a direct result of all the attacks of all variety, of all kinds, physical attacks on the Kuki-Zo people in Imphal and other in the valley, was this whole thing of like nurses. There's a nursing college, basically a medical college in Lamka, where allegedly Meitei nurses were, I mean, that was the fake news, that they had been like raped, right? And that's what really like kind of led to these summary attacks. But having studied misinformation and disinformation, honestly, it wasn't just, I mean, that was perhaps the final sort of straw and trigger that led to this kind of complete outburst of anger. But we have to really look at the timeline of events that was happening, and particularly where the government at the helm, that is Biren Singh, who's the chief minister, and the kind of already, the sort of like defamation campaign that was going on in mainstream media in Imphal, right, by Imphal outlets, both paper as well as TV. So that defamation campaign had already been on as, their whatever immigration status or citizenship status being under suspicion of the Kuki-Zo people, or whether they are the fact that they are whatever narco terrorists and poppy cultivators. Also, all of this hysteria was already being drummed. So the stage was set. It's not. I think a lot of people don't misunderstand that. Well, there was a fake news of Meitei nurses in being raped in Churachandpur, and that's what led to all this. I don't think it works. It doesn't work this way. This is not how a disinformation campaign works, that you just need to release one video and it will lead, all of this hell will, come loose, will break loose. It takes like actually a couple of months, if not weeks, or maybe even years of like, sort of building up that, resentment, that contempt towards a community, to put them all as such an outlier, or as such a kind of almost like an enemy of the state, or enemy of, quote unquote indigenous people, right? That then you feel like, something like an incident like, or even if it's a fake news happening, becomes like the last straw, like, well, we've tolerated enough, and now, enough is enough, and that's why we saw. That's also what explains that. That also explains, why not just the killings in the first 2 weeks were much higher among the Kuki-Zo people, but also explains I think the kind of heinous crimes that happen with the Kuki-Zo people. There were, of course, a few deaths also in the hills that were perpetrated against the Meiteis. But, if you look at by and large the numbers at that time, the first 2 weeks, most Meiteis were allowed to leave at least, in one piece. They were not as brutally massacred or killed, which is something that you cannot say for the Kuki-Zo people in the valley. And this is not to sort of, give this, this constant competition that is happening between who suffered more, who is a greater victim and all of that. These are just things that I'm stating as facts. And I think these facts are important in understanding why that that rape video was, very revealing, was very telling on so many levels, besides just, showcasing that, well, there's all kinds of heinous crimes happening, in the state because of this conflict or during this conflict, but also to show that, well, this is, to also sort of position that really, well, which community is, in power out here, which community has, in some sense, the greater, whatever, playing hand to commit such heinous crimes, and not just commit them, but also actually document them and, put them out on video for posterity, right? So, and also to do this to minority women, to put not just the women in their place, but also to put their community in their place, right? Women's bodies are often the site of such violence whenever any kind of communal or any kind of, whatever disruption of relations break out. So I think that's where I feel that this video has a lot of potential for a documentary to explore all of these things. What I've seen videos do so far, whatever news videos, was to mostly talk to the victims, to the family of the victims, and obviously ask them the very obvious question of how they're doing or how they're feeling or how they're suffering. But I think there's been a lot less done on the unpackaging around this video.
Okay, speaking of facts, would like to know your personal opinion on our goal for separate administration. I feel like we're using more of our sentiments and emotions rather than facts. So please tell me your honest opinion that what could be done to achieve the separate administrations.
I think this is a very, very long conversation to have, at least as far as separate administration goes. I'm of the opinion that certainly that the tribals are entitled to it. I don't just think that the Kuki-Zo tribals are entitled to it. I also think that the Nagas are, I essentially think that the hill tribal people are entitled to, self-administer, and this is something that falls very, very, sort of seamlessly within their rights under the Constitution of India. And that is the one holy grail, I would say, more than anything else in this country, especially for us as minorities, right? But I think the road to that is extremely fraught, whether it's for Nagas or for Kuki-Zo, it's extremely fraught with a lot of complexities. If you were to ask me what is the way, of course there is no one way, or I don't really know, or I don't really think there is one, sort of magical solution, or there's one answer to it. But anything, whatever it may be, it kind of has to start with unity. There's an utter lack of tribal unity when you speak of the Kuki-Zo. The very nomenclature Kuki-Zo itself is under-contested. So, we haven't, or we cannot really come under any kind of, agreement of our common goals, or of our sort of common existence and things like that. There's way too much division amongst us to begin with. Somewhere I feel, if you really were to ask me, like when someone brings up separate administration, I believe that if you were to ask very, very my personal opinion, I think there should be a pan-tribal unity. I'm talking about the unity between Nagas and Kukis as well, in fact, because there is a common goal, and that common goal is that, they live in a state where they are effectively the second-class citizens, right? And that really should be enough to unite them, Besides, of course, there are also several, if one has to go historically or culturally, there are also several points of, I would say, unity, or as well as togetherness, and also like commonality one can find. But the thing that happens more often is to, look at the more bloodied history between the Nagas and the Kukis. And from my reading of history, I don't think either side has this, absolute upper hand or an absolute like greater moral higher ground to stand on. I think both communities are fairly, complicit in their own crimes in that sense. But if you just, for us to even, I think to think about that sort of tribal unity and think about the whole conflict started with tribal unity. No one ever talks about that. We always, even the news for whatever reason keeps reporting that, well, this conflict broke out because the Kukis were, protesting this High Court order recommendation for, ST status for the Meiteis. But that's not the case. All tribal communities in the state were protesting that. And the protests happened across hill districts. But the violence only broke out in a Kuki-Zo, or which is Churachandpur, and of course it spread. But it only broke out in Churachandpur, in the place which has been, under a lot of, let's say, debate and defamation coming from essentially a very statist media as well as from the administration, right, from the state administration. And no one's really, put two and two together. Why is it that this, despite the protests happening everywhere, that, the trouble only broke out there? Again, there's a misunderstanding that the tribal, the Kuki-Zo, the protests that happened in Churachandpur turned violent. It did not turn violent. There is enough video and media documentation of the protests that I have seen myself, and which is out there for everyone to see, public access. And there is no sort of, there is no evidence of those protests breaking out or turning violent. But whatever may be the sequence of events, that aside, my point is being that, all of this happened, this, state going into a, slipping into a situation of civil war essentially, happened because it was also somewhere threatened by this tribal unity. And I would really think that that's something that is worth looking into and examining further, and deeper, except that not only are the tribals being, divided between, of course, the Nagas and the Kukis or the Kuki-Zo, but they're also being divided amongst the Kuki-Zo itself, right? I mean, you've got the whole Zomi faction, you've got allegedly a Thado faction as well now, and you've got the so-called Kukis and stuff, right? I mean, despite having banding together under ITLF, not everyone comes under that umbrella. So, even for a lot of journalists or local reporters who want to, who are following Manipur, who are essentially reporting on it, they just, they can't also just rely on ITLF. They have to still, look for the statements coming from Kotu. They still have to look at the statements coming from Kuki INP. They have to look at the statements coming from Zomi Council. I mean, there are 4 organizations that you have to wait, and that apparently is also not exhaustive enough or doesn't allegedly represent all of us, right? So I've always felt that there's a problem of too much democracy among the Kuki-Zo. We're all so vocal, which is great. On the one side, it's great because, I feel like it's great. I've certainly felt that as a tribal from this region, I mean, being part of this community has given me a lot of leeway to, speak my truth and speak truth to power without any kind of repercussions. I mean, I've seen those kind of repercussions in other communities, because other communities can be very, I mean, maybe tight-knit, but also kind of, can almost act like a bit of a, kangaroo court, deciding on what someone should say, so I feel like in fact there's a, there's a very problematic space for free speech in this region. But in that sense, I think that the Kuki-Zo, community bodies are a lot more liberal and a lot more relaxed in that sense. So that's a good side of it. But on the flip side of it, the issue is that all of us have an opinion, all of us want to say something, all of us want to vocalize our thoughts. And as a result of it, we can't seem to find a common space, or we can't seem to reach a common understanding, and agree to that and stick to that, right? So it's fairly easy to really come and, sort of exploit these fault lines and these differences, and, for us to kind of break away. So if you were to ask me again, since you asked me, the question was, how can we achieve separate administration? I think the question really should be, can we achieve separate administration? Because I mean, I think that's where the conversation is at. How is still a long journey ahead.
I mean, the one thing that I can take out from your sharing is that until and unless we come together in a common ground, work together, it's a far cry, separate administration is. It's good to know your opinion. I have one last question. in the field of journalism, or there are very few in our community. In fact, it's countable when we look at journalists, right? So how can we encourage, or I don't know how to put the question, but to really encourage the youngsters to take up the profession of journalism. So how do we do that? How do we go about?
I feel like, again, I want to, take a step back with your question here again. Sure. Because, I would be lying. I would be lying to myself and also to your audience if I were to be advocating, especially at this time and in these times, to be advocating a profession or an industry which is, certainly going through a very serious downturn. It's going through a very, difficult time. It's not the most attractive time. You can read the news reports as well. I mean, even across the country, there's been a dip basically in student admissions to journalism schools. I mean, there are very few journalism schools. There aren't too many. I think in the region there's literally all of one journalism school, apart from, of course, some of the main universities having a mass comm department. But it's not the best time. I would say certainly it's not the best time to be in the media. Perhaps in fact maybe might just be the worst time in many ways. But I think that still has maybe little bearing on the way that the community looks at this profession, right? Or any profession that's outside of the civil services, the coveted civil services, as I would like to say. Because I mean, for a multitude of reasons which I think are very, very understandable. Like, there is respect to be gotten. I mean, especially among our circles, if you're any of the I's basically, right? Or even if you're a grade 2 or grade 3 officer, I think, it just means just kind of I don't know, cheap thrills or fringe benefits of being able to sit right at the top or right in the front of a KSO or a KWS or something like that. You get a lot of importance basically, right? And you're revered a lot and things like that, right? Of course, the job itself is it has a safety net, it's secure. You can't technically be fired from the job or anything like that. The steady income, and of course it's decided by all of your what the government also revises these incomes every at least 2-3 years. So I mean, these are essentially the points that my parents had tried to sell me on, doing a government job. But I think, in a sense, that for me, journalism or writing precisely was partly very political a pursuit, in the sense that I felt that in this space you don't have people outside of a certain kind of identity, and these are people who came from very dominant identities, right? In the Indian subcontinent or in the context of India, most of these guys came from very upper caste Hindu backgrounds, right? They were usually a Jha, a Tiwari, I don't know, or some Bhattacharya, something like that, right? Or any of, basically it would either be a Tambram, or be someone an upper caste, Malayali or something like that. Or I mean, basically media is largely made up a lot of Malayalis and a lot of Bengalis and things like that. And of course, I mean, all other dominant castes, from also the region, right? Again, if you look at the northeast region, it was usually it's an Assamese Hindu, upper caste Assamese Hindu who goes around, covers the region. Whereas the few tribals that are there, they only cover their own district or their own state, So what happened as a result of it, that you have a certain, set of privileged people, historically privileged people and presently privileged people as well, who have been writing the histories and narratives of all the so-called, or all the subalterns, right? The people who are not part of the mainstream imagination. And as a result of it, you see why the narratives or the understanding about our people, and when I say our people, I don't just mean the Kuki-Zo people, but I mean people who are essentially marginalized or who are marginalized minorities, that they're, the understanding about our realities and our struggles, all of that, is extremely flawed. It's not represented, right? So for me, I came from a place where I want to kind of, write, about not just our people. I also want to write about the dominant caste people. I want to write about the upper caste people and what their politics about. I was like, I don't have to be. A lot of people say that, oh, my dream was to like, basically write our own histories. But I also feel like I do want to write it, and I have done that. But I also feel like, why should I be limited? Why is it that an Assamese Hindu can go around writing about everyone in this region, but I should be limited to like, I don't know, Lamka or like Kuki-Zo people or like Manipur or something like that. I mean, why should I be limited, So that's the thing, and essentially I've also like sort of realized that dream to some extent. I would like to say I've reported, I've reported from places like Taiwan, I've reported from Australia, I've reported on the indigenous people in Australia, I reported on the indigenous people in North America and the States. I also, spoke to a lot of like slightly very right-wing white people, nationalists in the United States and all of that. So I've had my gaze on a lot of these guys, and I bring my own sort of, essentially my lens to all of these people. So I think that's a thing, like in a sense the camera, in a very universal kind of an imagery, the camera person, has always been a white person, a white man, gearing his lens on, let's say, like a poor, whatever, Palestinian or something, like, basically supposedly a voiceless, person of color, or like essentially someone from a developing country or something like that. I wanted to turn that gaze. I'm like, I'm going to hold the camera, I'm going to hold the pen, and I'm going to write about your history as someone, you belonging to a dominant thing. And it's been interesting because I think I've written about people in a way that they never were written about, and it has created a lot of like ripples, and I mean, I've surely managed to upset a lot of people as well, which was not necessarily the intention going into it, that I'm going to go here, come here and piss you off and all that. But, in the course of my job and in telling the truth, and then, basing my work on reality, on facts, on evidence-based research, if it pisses you off, then yeah, you should be pissed off, because it's, I mean, it also has exposed a lot of hegemonies and a lot of systemic inequalities, which has a lot to do with, dominant cultures and dominant caste, practices.
Thank you so much for your time. I've learned so much from you, and please know that you're the one person that I can look up to, and then I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.